Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another round of Bases Picks. As always, please like and subscribe, share with a friend, a colleague, a relative, an associate, an enemy, any and all in between. You know it's appreciated. Now, this one is going to be a little bit different. What I'm going to focus on in this particular video is the undercards of both the events that are taking place over this weekend. So obviously you've got Fury versus Usyk taking place in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And then you've also got Navarrete versus Berinchyk taking place over in the States. I'm going to go through 4 fights overall. There are obviously a few more that I could delve into, but I feel like just to keep it sort of concise and keep it to the fights that most of the people are wanting to sort of talk about and find out about, I figured, yeah, 4 is nice and comfortable. So what we're going to do, each one's going to get its own individual segment. Going to speak briefly about the different opponents, styles, etc., and yeah, go through how I see each fight breaking down and give my prediction. Just to give you guys a quick summary of a few of the other fights on the card that I am interested in. I do want to see how Sergey Kovalev looks coming back in his fight over the weekend. Mark Chamberlain is back again against Joshua Wahab, I believe his name is. So, you know, David Naika, who's been very, very quiet over the last few years, but at cruiserweight, he's back on the card, and a few others on that particular one. So yeah, let's go into it. But we're going to kick it off, starting with Ajagba and Frank Sanchez. Alright, so you got Ajagba and Frank Sanchez, both guys 24-0. Frank Sanchez, I believe, with 17 KOs, and Ajagba, I believe, with 16. So records are very, very similar to each other. Well, their records themselves are identical. KO percentages is virtually similar as well. There's 1 KO difference between the two of them. So you kind of look at this fight, and initially you will say that stylistically this is probably the most tactically astute bout on the card. You've got 2 guys who are definitely looked at as pure boxers, although Ajagba in his previous fight definitely had more of a boxer puncher-ish type fight. But they are both 2 guys that will hang back, that will work behind their jab, that will look for their openings, look to control distance, look to control the pace of the fight, and not engage in battle and engage in attack until they're certain that sort of their shots are going to land or curry favor. This can on occasion lead to some dull affairs and some moments where you would rather not be watching their fights, quite frankly. And the 2 of them together, realistically, you could see it potentially being a bit of a stinker. However, with the fact that both guys are pretty accurate with what they do and how they sort of go about their work, it's fair to say that this one, while it will definitely have some lulls in action, there will be a few moments where the fight themselves, it does actually kick up and kick into gear. Now, if you look at each guy's best performances or their best wins, I guess Ajagba's best wins would have come against Derek Chisora and recently Arslanbek Makhmudov. Frank Sanchez's best win would probably come at the hands of F.A. Ajagba. I reckon that'll probably be the best win that he's had. But in between that, neither guys necessarily had all that impressive a run. For whatever reason, you could definitely say that both guys could have built on those successes a bit more than they actually did. But it's fine. We're here now, and it's a very intriguing matchup from a stylistic point of view. So look, how do I see this fight playing out? I definitely believe that the first couple of rounds are going to be sort of the most cagey, and I think a lot of the reserved nature is going to come primarily from Frank Sanchez. He likes to work behind behind his own pace. He likes to almost counter his opponents. He never likes to lead and be first in an exchange. Now, even though Ajagba is similar, he's more likely to try and employ a bit of movement to get to the target. And as we saw in his last fight, he definitely is someone that's willing to sort of invest into the body and invest and downstairs and actually, you know, start making those deposits from early to get his opponent's respect and also to stop their movement. in this fight, I'm looking at both guys. Both have got pretty decent speed. I think that Frank Sanchez has maybe the cleaner, straighter shots overall. And I feel that once he actually gets into range, he's more likely to sort of let a big shot go. He won't really go into combinations because he doesn't want to risk getting countered, but he will sort of launch a big attack, from outside inwards. Sometimes he has a penchant to sort of drop his hands as he is launching that attack, so someone like Ajagba could potentially counter punch him. But knowing Caballero sort of the way that I've seen him, he's more than likely will tuck up sort of behind the high guard, either try to move out of the way or punch after the exchange has been had, rather than trying to punch in between the punches. So that could be moments where Frank Sanchez has the opportunity to be able to sort of get in, do his work and get back out without necessarily being made to pay for any defensive lapses. But I do see this fight playing out very cagily over the first 3 rounds, with very little happening from both guys, both trying to find range with the jab, sort of the stab jabs to the body, just trying to use the jab as a range finder up top to the head. I can see the fight taking more of a I won't say action-packed, but a bit more of a direct change in rounds sort of 4 and 5. I can see a couple of big shots being landed, particularly by Frank Sanchez in about rounds 6 and 7. I see a moment where Ajagba will probably do some good body work. He'll be definitely in some of these rounds and making these rounds competitive, but I can just see a scenario where Frank Sanchez is just able to sort of get to work a bit more than Ajagba, especially sort of in that first half. Caballero's tough, so I don't see this fight actually ending in a stoppage. I do see it going the distance, and I see Frank Sanchez being the victor just by controlling especially the first half of the fight, and then just doing enough to sort of manage the back half once he's kind of realized that Caballero isn't quite ready to go and he can't land the shots that he wants to land. So my prediction for this fight is a Frank Sanchez unanimous decision win. I'm looking at I'm thinking 8-4, 7-5, where it's competitive, but it's quite clear that Frank Sanchez is the winner. So next up, we've got Joe Cordina versus Anthony Katché. This one, I'm not particularly going to spend as much time on. Joe Cordina is very tight at the 130 limit. He used to campaign at lightweight 135. He moved down to 130 as he believed that, he would be able to create better opportunities for himself down there. Since such, he has definitely said that he is looking to move back up to 135 for big money fights. He did want to unify last year, but with sort of some of the politics and the fact that him being, I guess, a mainstay over in Wales, sort of the Cardiff, the sort of the Cardiff arena, that he ultimately, the money that he wants, the arenas ain't quite big enough to generate the kind of money that he wants against the kind of opponents that he can be offered. So outside of going to maybe the Millennium Stadium, or the Principality as I guess it's known now, which is obviously something that he's never going to be able to fill out by himself. They've struggled to sort of find those type of big opponents for him. I think part of that is a reason why he's almost checked out, to the point where he says that he just wants to go for big money fights wherever it is, whether it's the Monte Carlo that he did the other day over down in Monaco, or now being on the Saudi bills. He just wants to sort of get these big paydays, but in order for him to do that, he's got to get past Anthony Katché, who is a very serviceable guy. He's very talented, but he's just been plagued with inactivity, loads of different injuries throughout his career. He's just not been that active, and that's kind of cost him quite a bit in terms of sort of getting title fights or getting the opportunities that his talent was probably deserved to him to get. But he's got one of those moments now. I believe he's 35 years old, which obviously doesn't really bode particularly well for him. I believe Joe Cordina is 30 or 31, so he's relatively fresh by comparison. Cordina is sort of the naturally bigger guy of the two. Katché is a guy, if he can get into his rhythm, he can make this a very, very horrible, awkward, nasty night for Joe Cordina. But because Cordina realizes that on the other side of this defense are those big money fights that he's been looking for, you know, especially with the backing of the Saudi cards and stuff at the minute. He knows there's no room for error. There's no room to ultimately to coast or to, you know, to put in a lackluster performance like he did against Vasquez in his last fight. So while I see Katché, I see him trying to basically start quite fast and see if he can steal the first few rounds to make Cordina then have to sort of chase the fight, which will play to Katché's hands. I just think that when it comes down to it, Joe Cordina he's gonna win a couple of exchanges, and in those exchanges, he's probably gonna put Katché down. At that time, I can see it sort of being a matter of time after that before the fight ends up getting stopped. I'm gonna go for a Joe Cordina round. I'm gonna go round 8. I'm gonna say a round 8 stoppage for Joe Cordina against Anthony Katché. All right, next up, the fight which I believe is the chief support on this card. Jairo Pataya versus Marius Briedis for the vacant IBF Cruiserweight Championship and the Ring Magazine title as well. So, how did we get here? For most people who know, obviously they had a match back in 2022. Jairo Pataya won that via unanimous decision. He broke Marius Briedis' nose in that fight and also suffered a double fracture in his jaw on both sides. So break here, both sides of the jaw. By the end of the fight, he couldn't even speak. His jaw was literally just hanging off. But he came through those crises, he came through those fires, he managed to hang on to sort of win the title, his first championship. He then had a defense against Jordan Thompson in September of last year. And subsequently, after that particular defense, he was then due to fight again in December on the Day of Reckoning card against Elizoro, which was also going to just be a quick turnaround fight because Marius Briedis wasn't available. He wasn't fit to fight at the time. So they petitioned for the IBF to, to sort of have this other keep busy fight, and then they would go to fight Briedis again in March. That was what was supposed to happen, or February or March to be exact. The IBF then said no, the mandatory's been called, so your next fight can't be anything other than him. They chose to take the activity and the money of Saudi Arabia, and as such had to relinquish the IBF title. But due to I think there was another person who was supposed to be in the queue to basically take on Briedis for the vacant title. I believe they either pulled out or they got injured, and then the next person down the line, I think there was one other person who took a different route. That may have actually been Richard Riakpo, if I remember correctly. And then subsequently, because of that, Jairo Pataya was the next person in the list, as he hadn't been removed from the rankings, so he ends up fighting again for the belt that he never lost in the ring immediately after he vacated it. Bit of a convoluted way of going about things, but that was the IBF for you at the time. So how do I see this fight going? Well, look, so you got orthodox in Marius Briedis, you got southpaw in Jairo Pataya. Now, of the two of them, obviously Briedis is the more experienced guy. He's also, in terms of like knowing all of the tricks of the trade and like, you know, sort of the dirty boxing, the inside boxing, being rough and ready, like he is that guy. He's not averse to sort of throwing an elbow in at times, or, you know, not so much hitting to the back of the head, but in a clinch, maybe, you know, one of those punches straying dangerously close to the back. He's you know, he's been one of the greatest cruiserweights of the modern times, seconded really only to Alexander Usyk, who obviously moved up, and we see what he's done at heavyweight. So you've got that as a scenario for Jai to contend with. Now he's seen this test before. At the age of 26, he passed the test. You know, he came through a major crisis to do so. So he showed that he's got heart, he showed he's got resolve, and he showed he's actually got a chin. Because when you're, you know, if your jaw's swinging like that, you know, and you're getting punched in it and still managing to stay on your feet and keep your composure, that shows that, you know, you're made of certain stuff. But on the other hand, again, Briedis, broken nose from I think the second or the third round, like struggling to breathe, you know, coughing and spitting out blood for, you know, 9 rounds of the fight. And he, you know, he came on strong towards the back end of this one. Now, having spoken to Jai Opetaia, I know that he's expecting Mairis Briedis to start this fight a lot quicker and a lot more aggressively than he started the first one. The first one, it started more cagey as a boxing match, but with Briedis being out of the ring for basically 2 years almost by the time that this fight actually comes around, there could be concerns over whether or not his gas tank can hold up, or whether he's got that full 12 round fitness, as he hasn't had to display it since 2022. So because of that, and obviously due to some of the injuries that he's had of late, the consensus would be that he's going to try and get this fight done early in the first 6 rounds, so that he doesn't have to test whether or not he's got resolve and got the engine to last the last 6. So I can imagine with that, Jai Opetaia's going to have to be very careful, especially in the first half of this fight. He can't afford to get into exchanges with Briedis. He's got to use his footwork and his movement to stick and move, especially, you know, he's got to wear him down bit by bit. He's got to take the air out of the tires piece by piece, and not be in a rush to kind of get the fight over and done with. On the other hand, Mairis Briedis has basically got to be rough, he's got to be dirty, he's got to skirt the rules, you know, very fine line, you know, between getting warnings, getting point deductions, and getting disqualified. But he's got to be and live in that space, and just basically he's got to quicken his feet. He's just got to get into range, throw behind that double jab, just to get, you know, to be able to hit to the chest, to push Jai Opetaia back towards the ropes, so that he can maybe try and unland some combos that way, to sort of, you know, just wear him down round by round, so that he can eventually take him out in around about sort of rounds 5 to 7. While I think that Jai Opetaia is prepared for a very hard 12 rounds, and he's prepared brutally, I can only imagine that having such a dangerous moment in that first fight is going to leave some form of, not a mental scar, but it's going to leave some form of trepidation, as I don't want that to happen again. Like, I'm prepared to go through the wars if I have to, but realistically, I don't need another jaw break. I don't need, like, my eyes to be looking crazy or anything like that. It's got to be a case of, you know, you just got to stick and move. You got to just get the job done. I can see him basically taking, not safety first. I'm not going to say that I think he's going to be safety first, but I do think that he's not going to take certain chances that maybe he would have taken before, just because he knows who he is in the ring with. I think he's going to try to keep the pace fast to a point that, you know, Mairis Briedis with his 30, I think he's 38 now, or no, actually I think he's 39. Yeah, with those 39-year-old legs, I don't really think that I think he's going to be looking to set a pace to make Briedis have to basically play catch up to the point that he can take this fight late, and dominate sort of down the back half of it. Briedis is tough. He's always had good resistance, and, you know, he's always been able to survive in a ring. And just due to sort of that level of toughness, seeing what he's actually been able to come through in previous times, even though this is a bit of a last chance saloon, I feel like his pride is not going to allow him to get stopped in this fight. Now it may not be in his hands. He may, you know, just end up taking a beating and a punishment, and as a result, it just happens that way. But something tells me that this fight goes the distance like the first fight did, with Briedis maybe even just having to survive a few of the later rounds. But yeah, I can see another unanimous decision, but I can see this one being much wider. Maybe Briedis having some moments of success in the first 5 rounds, maybe 1 or 2 rounds having like some really good shots getting in, but ultimately just getting outworked and getting beat up for the remainder of the fight, possibly going into survival mode in the last stanza, just to see out the fight on his feet. But yeah, my prediction is Jai Opetaia, unanimous decision. Actually, moving over to the top rank card, there's 2 fights that I want to speak about as opposed to one that I stated earlier. So the first one is Richard Torres against Brandon Moore. It's a heavyweight coming of age type fight. 2 American prospects. Brandon Moore, I think, is 30 years old, 14-0 with 8 KOs. Richard Torres, I believe, is 24, and he is 9-0 with 9 KOs. Now, anyone who's watched this channel for any length of time will know that Richard Torres is one of my sort of favorite up and comers at the moment. I enjoy his style. He's a southpaw ambush fighter. You know, he's a pressure fighter from that southpaw stance, throws punches in bunches, very good engine, good work rate, brilliant gas tank at the moment, or at least for the, you know, the 4 rounders, the 6 rounders and the 8 rounders he's been fighting. He's never really had to go past that point yet, so it's hard to tell what his energy reserves will look like, you know, sort of further down the line. But that's something I guess we can wait and sort of see about later on. But in this fight, Brandon Moore, 14-0, 8 KOs. So he's a bit more of a technician. He's more of a pure type boxer. He will sort of hang back, look for the perfect shot, look for the perfect way to sort of get an opponent out of the ring, as opposed to sort of really sort of going and looking for the knockout. The first few in his career sort of came a bit early, and then he started, you know, people became a bit more durable, so he employed a bit more of that safety first type approach. And you know, he's had a couple, you know, he's had a bit of a resurgence as of late over the last sort of year and that. But with him being 30, this is kind of like, this is his step up. He needs to use this fight to cement his I guess his contention to being in those talks for the sort of the next heavyweights up, because he doesn't have the same level of time as some of his contemporaries. But with this fight, just due to the fact that Richard Torres is such an ambush type guy, very quick on his feet, very quick to be able to get into range, and is a volume puncher that will let his hands go, he's not going to allow Moore to be able to judge the distance and hold the center of the ring and work when he wants to work. And I think because of that, he's going to end up overwhelming Brandon Moore. Now, if he can catch Richard Torres coming in with a hard jab to deter him, sort of maybe rounds 1 or 2, then he may be able to see out the rounds closer to the end of the fight, just because he's got the height and the reach advantage over Torres. But knowing how Torres is able to sort of get underneath those shots, his timing, Brandon Moore's timing is going to have to be excellent. And I just don't think in those moments, in that pressure cooker, he's going to be able to maintain composure. So because of that, I do see him actually getting taken out in this fight, and I see it happening in and around about the 7th round. I think he's going to put up a decent effort in the first half, but I think, yeah, between round 6 and 7 is where he succumbs to the pressure and ultimately maybe gets dropped a couple times, and then it gets waved off by the referee. And last but not least, for this particular video, we've got Giovanni Santian against Brian Norman Jr., which is the chief support to Navarrete versus Berinchyk. Now, this is a very, very intriguing fight. You got Santian, who's 32-0 with 17 KOs, against Brian Norman, who I believe is 25-0 with 19 KOs. So just by looking at the resumes and the records, you would allege that Norman is actually the bigger puncher of the two, obviously going the distance a lot less times than Santian. But Santian is also a smaller welterweight. He obviously recently came up to the welterweight limit from 140, and he has the ability to go back down there. But he's shown himself to be incredibly malleable. In his last fight with Alexis Rocha, he was the pressure fighter, stayed on the chest of Rocha and basically just beat him down. In a lot of his previous fights, he's actually been more of a pure boxer, like boxing from the outside, controlling the distance and maintaining space and range. Part of that, I believe, may have been one of the reasons why he had so little KOs, I guess, compared to what his style sort of shows you. Just maybe that whole being at 140, maybe getting down to that weight was a bit troubling, so he didn't really feel comfortable exchanging as much as he did when he sort of stepped up to that 147 limit. Now in this fight, this is probably going to be one of his hardest fights in terms of being in there with someone that can take your head off with one or two shots. So he's going to have to be extremely switched on. While he took virtually no damage in the Alexis Rocha fight, he did still get caught from time to time with his hands down. Now part of that, I think, is because he knew that he could, but it's always potential leads into bad habits when you do things like that. Now Norman he's not like the slickest of fighters. He doesn't particularly manage range like perfectly. There's nothing that he does sort of spectacularly, but he does everything efficient. He's one of those 6 out of 10s on everything except power, which I'll probably give him like a maybe 8.5. So if you can nullify everything else, you've still got the power to contend with. But he hasn't, to me, from what I've seen in the past, shown the signs of being able to make the necessary adjustments. Now that may sound a bit weird considering the fact he's never lost, but there's been fights where 1 or 2 tweaks would have seen him get to his goal and his mission a lot quicker than he actually did, but he was just unable to kind of do that, and maybe he just stuck to the process that he knew best and that he felt would work. So because of that, I feel if Santian switches up patterns on him, it may take Norman several rounds before he's able to sort of get the read and then make the adjustment. And then if another adjustment gets made, it may take him longer, so he could end up being way down on the cards by the time he actually has any major success. But in this fight, I think I'm gonna go with the guy who's experienced up at this level, or up at a level a bit more than the other. And for that particular reason, I think it's going to be a very spirited bout. I think both guys are going to have some pretty good moments, but I do think that Santian is just going to end up having a lot more of them and making it quite a clear points decision win. So yeah, my prediction is Giovanni Santian to win via unanimous decision. Please leave your comments down below for all of the fights we spoke about, and any others that you want to talk about. This video is obviously coming out now. The main video with the 2 main events will be out Friday or maybe Thursday afternoon if I'm feeling generous, but we'll wait and see. For that being said though, don't forget to like, subscribe and share. Thank you very much for watching, but that's Basis Picks for the undercard. Locked.